All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we are going to tackle something really big. A school of thought that wants to flip, well, basically centuries of Western philosophy completely on its head. And let's just jump right in with this quote from the Argentinian philosopher Enrique Dussel. It's a gut punch. Before I think, there is I conquer. See, he's arguing that the whole famous starting point of modern philosophy, Descartes' I think, therefore I am, is actually hiding something much darker, something way more violent. Okay, so to really get our heads around this, here's how we'll break it down. We'll look at it as a tale of two philosophies. We'll start with the view from what Dussel calls the center, and then listen to the voice from the outside. Then we'll dig into the different faces of domination, and finally, explore the path to what he calls the praxis of liberation. So yeah, let's get into it. So, a tale of two philosophies, two lenses for viewing the world. I want you to think about philosophy for a second, not as a bunch of dusty old books, but more like a lens that shapes how you see everything. Dussel's big argument is that for the last 500 years, the main lens we've all been handed is one that belongs to the conqueror. And that lens doesn't just show us reality. It kind of defines what we're even allowed to see as real. All right, so first up, the view from the center. This is the philosophy of the conqueror. You can think of this as the traditional philosophy of the West. It's the one that gets to write the history books, the one that defines all the terms, and, the one that builds the very system we're all living in. And this slide, wow, this really lays it all out. The two completely different starting points. Okay, so on the left, you've got the center, right? Western thinking. It all starts with the self, the thinking self. I think, therefore I am. The world is basically understood from the top down, from the perspective of the dominator. Anyone else, the other, is seen as, as less than. Maybe barbaric or just an object to be controlled. Its logic is called dialectics, which is all about resolving contradictions within its own system. But look at the right. The philosophy of liberation says, hold on a second. The real starting point wasn't I think, it was I conquer. The world is understood from the perspective of the oppressed. And here, the other isn't an object. They're a real free person whose voice comes from beyond the system entirely. And its logic, analectics, is all about having a dialogue with that outside voice. And listen, this is not just some abstract academic debate. It has had incredibly violent real-world consequences. I mean, you can trace this logic all the way back. You have Aristotle saying the Greek is a man, but the barbarian isn't, so a slave is just naturally a slave. Fast forward to Hegel, who basically said the world-dominating state has all the rights and everyone else has none. This idea of modernity becomes Europe's mission to civilize the world. So what's the result? The philosophy of the center becomes what Dussel calls the ideology of ideologies. It's the ultimate justification for empire. Okay, so if that's the center, what's the alternative? Well, the philosophy of liberation asks us to do something radical, to put on a completely new lens and try to see the world from the periphery, from the viewpoint of those who the center has defined as non-existent. This leads us to a really crucial concept, exteriority. Now, don't let the fancy word throw you. Think of it less as a physical place and more like an entire reality that exists beyond the dominant system's horizon. It's the world of the poor, the oppressed, the colonized, their history, their reality, their voice. It's everything that the logic of the center just can't contain or explain. And the other is the human face of that exteriority. We're talking about the indigenous person whose land was taken, the worker whose labor is exploited, the woman who's oppressed in a patriarchal society. The key thing here is that they're not just a slightly different piece inside the puzzle of the system. No, they are a completely distinct, free reality that challenges the system's claim to be the only reality, just by existing. This is such a powerful idea right here. The face of the poor, the oppressed, is provocation and judgment by its mere revelation. So when the other speaks, when that person from the periphery just states their truth, like, I am hungry, or this is my culture, that voice isn't just a complaint. Dussel says it's a judgment on the entire system that created that hunger in the first place. So now we get to the faces of domination. Dussel argues that this isn't just some big, abstract political thing. No, it's woven into the very fabric of our lives, our relationships, our families, our culture. And he breaks it down into three key spheres where this domination really plays out. First, you've got the political. That's the imperial center versus the colonial periphery. He calls this a kind of fratricide, like the killing of a brother. Then there's the erotic sphere. This is machismo, the phallic totality, versus woman as an object. He calls this a symbolic uxoricide, or killing of the wife. And finally, the pedagogical, basically education. This is where imperial culture silences popular culture, which he calls filicide, the killing of the child's own identity. Let's zoom in on that erotic domination for a second. Dussel analyzes machismo not just as bad behavior, but as a whole worldview, an ontology, where the male perspective is treated as the only one that's real. The woman isn't seen as a free person with her own reality. She's reduced to an object, a non-being, in a world completely defined by male terms. He even points to things like the old tango Margot as an example of this in culture.
And it's the same thing with pedagogical domination. The education system can end up teaching the child from the periphery that real knowledge, real art, real history, it all belongs to the center, to the dominator. What does that do? It alienates them from their own roots, their own popular culture. It's a way of killing their connection to their own people.
Okay, so, wow. How do you break free from all of this? From these interlocking systems of domination? Well, Dussel is very clear on this. It takes more than just thinking new thoughts. It requires action, what he calls a praxis of liberation.
And this is the method for doing it. It's called the analectic moment. And notice where it starts. Step 1 is not think hard. It's hear the word of the other. You have to truly listen to the protest coming from outside the system. Step 2, take responsibility. This isn't passive listening. It's making an ethical choice to act, even when it's risky. And that leads to step 3, engage in a praxis of liberation. That means taking real, concrete action to tear down the old order and build something new and more just.
And it's so important to see that this philosophy didn't just pop up out of nowhere in the 1970s. It's part of a long, long history of resistance. You can trace a line from people like Bartolomé de las Casas back in the 1500s, who was denouncing the violence of the Spanish conquest, all the way to economists in the 60s proving how wealth flows from the periphery to the center. And today, this philosophy is being used to analyze and fight modern neo-colonialism, whether it's from corporations or in the struggle for ecological justice.
And the stakes could not be higher. This isn't just about ideas. It's about the real, material lives of billions of people. I mean, look at this number. According to one analyst, a staggering 80% of the real profits the center gets from trade comes directly from exploiting the periphery. This dynamic fundamentally shapes our entire global economy.
So, let's wrap this up. What are the big takeaways here? First, there are two lenses. Traditional Western philosophy is often the center's lens. Liberation philosophy gives us the lens of the periphery. Second, the other. The voice of the oppressed is the starting point for any real critique, and it comes from the space of exteriority. Third, this whole worldview isn't harmless. It justifies domination, political, erotic, and cultural. And finally, praxis. Liberation isn't just a thought exercise. It's an active, ethical commitment to building a new, more just world.
And that brings us to a really challenging final question, one we have to ask ourselves. If every philosophy, every worldview is a kind of lens, a lens that brings some things into sharp focus but leaves other things out completely, what does your lens leave out? What people, what histories, what realities does your own way of seeing the world make invisible?